My name is Rebecca Thompson, and 3 months ago, I watched my entire family grovel at my feet after discovering I was worth $47 million. The same family who had spent 32 years treating me like an afterthought while showering my younger sister with everything I ever dreamed of. But the moment they found out about my fortune, everything changed. What they didn't know was that I had been secretly recording every conversation, every snide comment, every dismissal for the past year. And when the truth finally came out at my sister's engagement party, the look on their faces was worth every lonely birthday, every forgotten achievement, every time they chose her over me. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. It started on a gray November morning in Chicago when I received the call that would change everything. I was sitting in my cramped studio apartment on the north side, the radiator clanging like an angry ghost, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end belonged to Margaret Lawson, senior partner at Hartwell & Associates, a law firm I'd never heard of. Miss Thompson, I'm calling regarding the estate of Helena Richardson. You've been named as the sole beneficiary of her will. I almost hung up, thinking it was some elaborate scam. Helena Richardson? The name meant absolutely nothing to me, but something in the lawyer's tone made me stay on the line. I'm sorry, there must be some mistake. I don't know anyone by that name. Miss Richardson was your great-aunt, your maternal grandmother's sister. She passed away 6 weeks ago and left explicit instructions that you be contacted only after all estate matters were settled. Could you come to our office this afternoon? The law office occupied 3 floors of a gleaming downtown building, the kind of place where every surface screamed expensive. Margaret Lawson was a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a perfect chignon and eyes that seemed to see straight through pretense. She led me into a conference room lined with leather-bound books and handed me a manila envelope thick enough to contain a novel. Your great-aunt Helena was quite wealthy, Miss Thompson. She made her fortune in technology investments back in the 80s and 90s, long before anyone understood how valuable those companies would become. She never married, had no children, and spent the last decades of her life quietly managing her portfolio from a ranch in Montana. I stared at the envelope, afraid to open it. But why me? I've never even met her. Margaret's smile was gentle but knowing. According to her letter, she had been watching your family from a distance for years. She saw how you were treated compared to your sister and wanted to ensure you had the resources to build the life you deserved. She was quite specific about her reasoning. Inside the envelope was a letter written in careful cursive on cream-colored stationery, along with documents that made my hands shake as I read them. Helena Richardson had indeed been watching. She knew about every family gathering I'd been excluded from, every achievement of mine that went uncelebrated, while my sister Melissa's smallest accomplishments were treated like national holidays. She knew about the college fund that existed only for Melissa, about the car my parents bought her for her 16th birthday, while I worked 3 jobs to pay for my own transportation. The letter was dated just 2 months before her death. Rebecca, you don't know me, but I know you. I've watched your family for 30 years, and I've seen how they've consistently chosen your sister over you. I've seen your strength, your independence, your quiet determination to succeed despite their neglect. I want you to have the tools to show them who you really are, but only when you're ready. The choice of how and when to reveal this gift is entirely yours. The numbers on the financial documents seemed impossible. $47 million in diversified investments, real estate holdings in 3 states, and a trust fund that would generate more income annually than my parents made in 5 years combined. I read the figures 3 times before they started to feel real. Margaret explained that Helena had structured everything to avoid immediate taxation and publicity. The money was mine, completely and legally, but I could choose how and when to access it. She had even arranged for a financial advisor, David Shen, who had been managing Helena's portfolio for over a decade and would help me navigate this new reality.
I walked out of that office in a daze, the November wind cutting through my thin jacket as I made my way to the subway. The city looked different somehow, as if I was seeing it through different eyes. Every expensive restaurant, every luxury boutique, every gleaming high-rise suddenly represented possibilities rather than impossibilities. But as I sat on the train heading back to my neighborhood, a different emotion began to surface. Anger. Pure, white-hot anger at a family who had made me feel worthless for 30 decades. They had convinced me I was the problem, that my sensitivity to their treatment was an overreaction, that Melissa simply deserved more because she was more outgoing, more charming, more worthy of their love and investment. I thought about last Christmas when my parents had given Melissa a down payment for her first house while handing me a gift card to Target. I remember my college graduation when they showed up late and left early because Melissa had a tennis match that same afternoon. I recalled every birthday dinner where the conversation centered on Melissa's latest achievement, while my own accomplishments were dismissed with polite nods and quick subject changes.
The anger felt good. It felt clarifying. For the first time in my adult life, I had real power, and I intended to use it wisely. Over the next few weeks, I met with David Chen multiple times, learning about my new financial reality. He was a soft-spoken man in his 40s who had clearly respected Helena and seemed committed to helping me honor her intentions. He explained that the money had been earning returns for months since her death, actually growing while I remained unaware of its existence. Helena was very specific about wanting you to have time to process this before making any major decisions, he told me during our second meeting. She understood that sudden wealth can be overwhelming and wanted you to have support systems in place. I decided to keep the inheritance secret while I figured out how to handle this new reality. I continued living in my studio apartment, working my job as a graphic designer for a small marketing firm, maintaining the exact same routine I had had for the past 5 years. But now, everything felt different, because I knew it was a choice, not a necessity. The hardest part was interacting with my family as if nothing had changed. 2 weeks after meeting with Margaret Lawson, my mother called with her usual mixture of guilt and disappointment. "Rebecca, your sister is having her engagement party next month. I hope you'll make an effort to be there and maybe try to look nicer than usual. You know how important these events are to the family." Even with $47 million in my accounts, her words still stung. But now they stung differently. Now they felt like evidence rather than personal failures. "Of course, Mom. I wouldn't miss it." "Good. And maybe you could chip in for a nice gift. Melissa registered at some lovely places, though I know the prices might be a stretch for you." I almost laughed. The wedding gift registry I'd already looked at online totaled less than what my investments earned in interest every few days. "I'll figure something out." As I hung up the phone, I realized Helena had given me more than money. She had given me perspective. For the first time in my life, I could see my family's treatment of me clearly, without the fog of doubt and self-blame that had clouded my judgment for decades. The engagement party was still 6 weeks away, but I had already decided it would be the perfect venue for my revelation. Not because I wanted revenge, exactly, but because I wanted truth. I wanted them to see me clearly, to understand what they had thrown away with their years of dismissal and neglect. I spent those weeks carefully planning, not just what I would say, but how I would document everything. I wanted a record of their reaction when they realized the daughter they had consistently undervalued was worth more than their combined lifetime earnings. The irony wasn't lost on me that the same family who had made me feel invisible for 32 years was about to discover I was the most successful person any of them had ever met. The pattern started when I was 7 and Melissa was 4. Our mother, Patricia Thompson, had always been obsessed with appearances, and Melissa was everything she had dreamed of in a daughter. Golden curls that caught the light just right,
bright blue eyes that sparkled when she smiled, and a natural charm that made adults melt within minutes of meeting her. I, on the other hand, had inherited our father's darker features and quieter disposition. Where Melissa was sunshine, I was shadow. Growing up in the suburbs of Denver, our house was a shrine to Melissa's achievements. The refrigerator door showcased her finger paintings, her preschool graduation certificate, her first ballet recital photo. My artwork somehow never made it past the kitchen counter before disappearing into the garbage. When I asked Mom why my pictures weren't displayed, she would sigh and say something about running out of space or not wanting the refrigerator to look cluttered. Our father, Robert Thompson, worked as a mid-level manager at an insurance company. He was a man who believed in traditional gender roles and saw daughters as investments that would eventually belong to other families. But even within that limited worldview, Melissa was clearly his favorite. She would curl up on his lap during television time while I sat on the floor. When we both wanted his attention, he would automatically turn to her first, dismissing my attempts to share my day with distracted nods. The financial disparity became obvious early. When Melissa turned 6, she received an elaborate princess-themed birthday party with 20 invited guests, a hired entertainer, and a cake that cost more than our family typically spent on groceries in a week. When I turned 9 that same year, I got a small family dinner and a book from the discount store. When I asked why my party was different, Mom explained that some children were just easier to plan for, that Melissa had such specific tastes that required special attention. School only highlighted the differences. Melissa was naturally gifted academically, reading before kindergarten and excelling in every subject without apparent effort. I struggled with dyslexia that went undiagnosed for years because my parents assumed I simply wasn't applying myself. While they hired tutors for Melissa to keep her ahead of her grade level, I spent afternoons alone in my room, battling homework that seemed impossible and feeling increasingly stupid. The turning point came in middle school. I had spent months working on a science fair project about renewable energy, staying up late to research solar panel efficiency, and building a working model that demonstrated how sunlight could power small electronics. I was proud of the work, genuinely excited to show my parents what I had accomplished. The night before the science fair, I presented my project to them in the living room, explaining each component and how the energy conversion worked.
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Dad glanced up from his newspaper for maybe 30 seconds before returning to the sports section. Mom offered a perfunctory, "That's nice, dear," before turning back to helping Melissa practice piano. Neither of them attended the science fair the next day, despite my reminders and requests. I watched other kids' parents taking photos, asking questions, celebrating their children's efforts, while I stood alone next to my project. I won second place. When I came home with the ribbon, bursting to share the news, I found the living room decorated with balloons and streamers. For a moment, I thought they had somehow found out about my award and were celebrating. Instead, I learned that Melissa had been selected for the school's advanced reading program, an honor that apparently warranted a family celebration, complete with her favorite takeout dinner and a new book series as a reward. I held my ribbon in my pocket during dinner, listening to my parents praise Melissa's intellectual gifts and discuss how proud they were of her achievement. When there was finally a lull in the conversation, I quietly mentioned my science fair award. Mom smiled and said, "How wonderful," in the same tone she used when the grocery store clerk told her to have a nice day. Dad didn't look up from his plate. The conversation immediately returned to Melissa's reading level and her teacher's suggestion that she skip ahead a grade. High school brought new challenges and more pronounced favoritism. Melissa blossomed into everything our parents had hoped for: student council president, varsity cheerleader, homecoming queen, straight-A student who somehow made academic excellence look effortless. College recruiters began calling the house during her junior year, offering scholarships to prestigious universities. I found my own path through art and technology, teaching myself graphic design on an old computer I'd bought with money from my part-time job at a local coffee shop. I spent hours learning software programs, creating digital artwork, and building websites for small businesses around town. My portfolio grew stronger each month, and I began earning decent money from freelance projects. But when I tried to share my excitement about landing a contract with a local restaurant to redesign their marketing materials, my parents' response was lukewarm at best. "That's nice that you have a little hobby," Mom said, not looking up from the stack of college brochures she was organizing for Melissa. "Just make sure it doesn't interfere with your regular studies." The word hobby stung because it revealed how little they understood what I was building. This wasn't casual dabbling. I was developing real skills and earning actual money. But in their eyes, if it wasn't traditional academic achievement like Melissa's, it wasn't worth serious consideration. The college years marked the most dramatic difference in treatment. Melissa received a full financial package from our parents: tuition, room and board, spending money, and a car to get around campus. They had been saving for her education since she was born, accumulating enough to cover 4 years at an expensive private university without any financial strain. When my turn came, I learned there was no college fund for me. Dad sat me down in his home office, surrounded by filing cabinets and the smell of old papers, and explained that they had exhausted their education savings on Melissa's expenses. He suggested I look into community college or find a university that offered substantial financial aid. The conversation lasted less than 10 minutes, delivered with the same casual tone he might use to discuss weekend weather. I applied for every scholarship and grant available, working additional hours at the coffee shop to save money, and ultimately assembled enough funding to attend a decent state university. But I lived in the cheapest dorm room available, worked multiple part-time jobs throughout college, and graduated with student loan debt that would take years to repay. Meanwhile, Melissa's Instagram feed showcased spring break trips to tropical locations, sorority formals and expensive dresses, and study abroad semesters in Europe, all funded by our parents' continued financial support. The professional years after college revealed the lasting impact of these patterns. I moved to Chicago to pursue graphic design opportunities, living in tiny apartments and building my career slowly but steadily. Melissa returned to Denver after graduation and was immediately welcomed into Dad's social network, landing a marketing position at a company where he knew the hiring manager. When she decided to buy her first house at 25, our parents provided the down payment as an early inheritance gift. I learned about the house purchase through a family group text that included photos of the closing ceremony, complete with champagne glasses and congratulatory hugs. The text thread was full of excitement and pride, with extended family members chiming in to celebrate Melissa's achievement. When I responded with congratulations, Mom called me later that evening. "I hope you're not feeling left out about Melissa's house," she said, her tone suggesting she expected me to graciously accept my position as the less successful daughter. "You know we'd help you too if we could, but your sister was ready to buy at the right time and we wanted to help her get established." The subtext was clear. Melissa deserved help because she was making traditional life choices that our parents approved of, while my unconventional career and single lifestyle in a big city represented poor decisions that shouldn't be rewarded.
The romantic relationships followed the same pattern. When Melissa began dating Brandon Walsh, a commercial real estate agent from a well-established Denver family, our parents treated him like the son they'd never had. Brandon was invited to every family gathering, included in vacation planning, and consulted on major household decisions as if he were already an official family member. The relationship was celebrated and supported from the beginning. When I dated someone seriously enough to bring him home for a holiday, the reception was politely cold. My parents asked the requisite questions about his job and background, but never made any effort to build a real relationship with him. There were no invitations to family events, no inclusion in vacation plans, no interest in getting to know him beyond surface-level politeness. The message was clear. My relationships weren't important enough to warrant investment because I wasn't important enough to warrant investment. This pattern had been my normal for so long that I'd learned to expect it, to plan around it, to protect myself from the disappointment by not hoping for different treatment. I'd built a life in Chicago that didn't depend on my family's approval or support, surrounded myself with friends who valued my contributions, and found professional success that validated my worth even when my family didn't. But sitting in that law office, reading Helena Richardson's letter, I finally understood that the problem had never been me. The problem was a family system that had decided, for reasons I might never fully understand, that one daughter was worth investing in and the other was not. For 32 years, I had internalized their judgment as truth. Now I had the resources to show them exactly how wrong they'd been. Armed with my newfound financial security, but still maintaining my secret, I began seeing my family interactions through a completely different lens. Every conversation became both painful and illuminating, confirming decades of suspicions I'd tried to rationalize away. The engagement party was 6 weeks out, and each family interaction felt like gathering evidence for a case I was building against years of gaslighting. The first test came when Melissa called me 3 weeks after my meeting with Helena's lawyer. Her voice bubbled with the kind of excitement that had always commanded our family's immediate attention. "Rebecca, I need your help with something super important. Brandon proposed, and we're planning the most amazing engagement party. Mom suggested I call you because you're good with, artsy stuff." The casual dismissal of my professional skills as artsy stuff would have crushed me months earlier. Now it felt like watching someone insult a stranger. I was worth $47 million. I had built a successful freelance business from nothing, yet my own sister still saw my career as a cute hobby. "What kind of help do you need?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Well, we want custom invitations, maybe some signage for the venue, that sort of thing. I know you do computer graphics or whatever, so I thought you might want to contribute to the party that way. It would be so much more meaningful than just buying something off the registry." The subtext was unmistakable. Your time isn't valuable, but it's all we expect you to contribute. Meanwhile, I knew from Mom's previous comments that other family members were being asked for monetary contributions toward the event's substantial costs. "I'd be happy to design the invitations. What's your budget for the project?" Silence stretched across the phone line. "Budget?" I thought, you're my sister. I figured you'd want to do it as your engagement gift." This was the family dynamic in perfect miniature. Melissa's time, education, and career moves were treated as valuable investments worthy of financial support. My professional skills were expected to be donated freely because they weren't considered real work. "Of course," I heard myself saying. "Send me the details." But this time, I had a plan. I would create the most stunning invitation suite she'd ever seen, something that would cost thousands of dollars if she'd hired a professional design firm. I wanted her to understand exactly what she was getting for free, even if she never acknowledged its value. Over the next 2 weeks, I poured professional-level effort into Melissa's project. I designed elegant invitations with custom typography, created matching save-the-dates, RSVP cards, and coordinated signage for the venue. Every piece was crafted with the attention to detail I typically reserved for my highest-paying clients. I even had them printed on premium paper stock that I paid for myself. When I presented the finished suite to Melissa and our parents during a family dinner, their reaction was telling. Melissa flipped through the pieces quickly, pausing only to show Brandon the design elements that featured their names prominently. "These are cute," she said, already moving on to show our parents the catering menu she'd selected. "Thanks for doing this." Dad barely glanced at the invitations before returning to his conversation with Brandon about golf courses. Mom held one invitation up to the light, examining the paper quality with mild interest. "Very nice, Rebecca. I'm sure these will work perfectly." I had spent over 30 hours creating a design package that any wedding planner would have charged $3,000 for, and the response was the same polite dismissal I'd received for my childhood art projects. But now, I wasn't hurt. I was fascinated by their inability to recognize value when it was literally in their hands.
The wedding planning conversations that followed revealed new layers of the family's financial dynamics. During another family dinner, I listened as Mom explained how she and Dad were contributing $15,000 toward the engagement party costs, with additional family members providing various amounts. Melissa rattled off the guest list, venue details, and catering arrangements with the casual confidence of someone who had never questioned whether the money would be available.
"We're inviting about 150 people," she explained to me, as if I weren't already aware that I'd designed invitations for exactly that number. The Riverside Country Club is perfect for what we want. Brandon's parents are members, so we got the member rate for the venue rental. I mentally calculated the costs as she described the menu, bar service, flowers, and entertainment. The total was easily approaching $25,000 for a single evening. This was more than I'd earned in my first year out of college, being spent on one party to celebrate an engagement. But the real revelation came when Mom pulled me aside after dinner. "I hope you understand why we can't include you in the financial planning for this event," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "We know you're still getting established in your career, and we don't want to put pressure on you to contribute more than you can afford. Maybe you could help with some of the day-of coordination instead." The assumption that I couldn't afford to contribute financially was based on years of conditioning about my perceived value and earning potential. They had no idea that I could write a check for the entire party without affecting my monthly budget. More importantly, they had no interest in finding out whether their assumptions about my circumstances were accurate. "I understand," I said, filing away another piece of evidence about how thoroughly they had categorized me. 2 weeks before the party, I decided to test another boundary. I called Mom and mentioned that I was thinking about taking a vacation after Melissa's engagement celebration. "That sounds nice, dear. Somewhere affordable, I hope. Maybe a long weekend somewhere close by?" "Actually, I was thinking about Europe, maybe Italy or France." The pause was long enough to be uncomfortable. "Rebecca, I hope you're being responsible with your money. I know you've been working more lately, but international travel is expensive, and you should be thinking about building an emergency fund instead." The irony was breathtaking. She was lecturing me about fiscal responsibility while simultaneously spending thousands of dollars on a party for my sister. But more than that, she was revealing how little she knew about my actual financial situation. Despite living independently for over a decade, supporting myself entirely without family assistance, they still saw me as financially unstable and in need of guidance. "I've been saving up," I said simply. "Well, just be careful. You know how easy it is to get in over your head with credit cards and travel expenses." Meanwhile, conversations about Melissa's upcoming honeymoon to the Maldives, a trip that would cost more than most people's annual salaries, were discussed with enthusiastic approval and offers of additional financial support if needed. The breaking point came during a family group text discussion about engagement party gifts. Various aunts, uncles, and cousins were coordinating their contributions, sharing ideas about expensive kitchen appliances, home furnishings, and cash gifts. I watched the conversation unfold for hours, noting who was expected to contribute what amounts based on their perceived financial capabilities. Finally, Aunt Susan, Mom's younger sister, directly addressed me in the group chat. "Rebecca, honey, don't worry about getting something expensive. I'm sure Melissa will appreciate whatever thoughtful little gift you put together. Maybe something homemade or artistic." The condescension was so blatant that several family members jumped in to agree, all reassuring me that expensive gifts weren't expected from me specifically. Their kindness was well-intentioned, but based on fundamental misunderstandings about my circumstances. I typed and deleted several responses before settling on, "I've already ordered something special. Thanks for thinking of me." That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I went online and ordered the most expensive item from Melissa's registry, a complete set of professional-grade kitchen appliances that totaled just over $4,000. I had them shipped directly to the venue with a card that simply read, "Congratulations on your engagement. Love, Rebecca." But I didn't stop there. I also scheduled a surprise of my own for the engagement party. David Chen, my financial advisor, had mentioned that his wife Sarah owned an event photography business that specialized in high-end social gatherings. I hired her to document the entire evening, specifically requesting that she capture candid reactions and conversations throughout the night.
"I want a complete record," I told Sarah during our planning meeting.
Every speech, every toast, every casual conversation, especially any discussions about gifts or family dynamics. Sarah was professional enough not to ask questions, but I could see her curiosity about why someone would want such comprehensive documentation of a family party. I simply explained that it was an important family milestone that deserved proper documentation. The final piece of my plan involved my appearance at the party itself. For 32 years, I had dressed down for family events, partly from financial necessity, but mostly from learned behavior about not outshining Melissa. This time would be different. I made an appointment at Chicago's most exclusive styling service, the kind of place where celebrities and executives go for complete image transformations. I explained that I needed to look like someone worth $47 million, because that's exactly what I was. The stylist, Andrea Walsh, took me through a complete wardrobe selection process. We chose a stunning black dress from a designer I'd only seen in magazines, paired with jewelry that cost more than my current monthly rent when I had one. The total look was elegant, sophisticated, and unmistakably expensive. "You look like you belong in boardrooms and charity galas," Andrea said as she made final adjustments. "Whatever statement you're trying to make, this will definitely make it." Standing in front of the mirror, I barely recognized myself. For the first time in my life, I looked like the successful, confident woman I'd actually become, rather than the struggling artist my family still saw me as. The engagement party was 5 days away, and every detail was in place. The expensive gift would arrive on schedule. The photographer would document everything. I would arrive looking exactly what I was. A multimillionaire who had been consistently underestimated by people who claimed to love her. I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning a revelation. There's a difference between wanting to hurt people and wanting them to see clearly. After 32 years of being invisible, I was finally ready to be seen. The evening of Melissa's engagement party arrived with unseasonable warm weather for December in Denver. The Riverside Country Club glowed with white lights strung through bare winter trees, and valets in crisp uniforms directed luxury vehicles into the circular drive. I sat in my rental car for several minutes, watching family members and guests stream into the venue, most of them dressed in the kind of conservative elegance that screamed old money and established social circles. My transformation was complete. The black designer dress hugged my frame perfectly. The diamond earrings I'd purchased specifically for this evening caught the light with every movement, and my professionally styled hair fell in elegant waves past my shoulders. I looked like I belonged in boardrooms and charity galas, which was exactly the effect I'd been aiming for. But more importantly, I looked like someone who didn't need anyone's financial advice or career guidance. Sarah Chen, my photographer, was already inside setting up discreet equipment around the venue. We'd coordinated our timing so she could capture the family's initial reactions to my appearance before they had time to compose themselves. The recording devices I'd hidden in my small clutch purse would supplement the visual documentation. As I walked through the country club's marble foyer, I could feel conversations pause and restart as people noticed me. The maitre d' greeted me with the kind of deference usually reserved for VIP guests. His trained eye recognized the quality of my outfit, even if he didn't recognize me personally. The main ballroom had been transformed into Melissa's vision of sophisticated elegance. Round tables draped in ivory linens surrounded a central dance floor, with elaborate floral centerpieces that probably cost more individually than most people spent on entire dinner parties. A jazz quartet played softly in one corner, while uniformed servers circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. I spotted my family immediately. They were clustered near the gift table, which was already overflowing with beautifully wrapped packages. Melissa looked radiant in a pale pink dress that undoubtedly cost more than my monthly mortgage payment back when I had one. Brandon stood beside her in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, looking every inch the successful young executive our parents had always hoped one of their daughters would marry. Mom saw me first. Her champagne glass actually paused halfway to her lips as she took in my appearance, her eyes moving from my professionally styled hair down to my designer shoes with obvious confusion. She nudged Dad, who turned toward me with the same expression he might wear if a stranger had walked into his living room.
Rebecca, Mom's voice carried across the immediate area, drawing attention from nearby family members. Is that really you? I approached them with the confident stride I'd practiced with my stylist, my smile warm but controlled. Hi, Mom. The party looks beautiful. Melissa turned at the sound of my voice, and her expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession. Surprise, confusion, and something that looked suspiciously like concern. In all our years of family gatherings, I had never arrived looking anything other than the struggling artist they expected me to be. Rebecca, you look... Dad started, then stopped, clearly struggling to find appropriate words. Very nice. That's quite the dress. The subtext of his comment was obvious to everyone within hearing range. Where did you get the money for that dress? Several relatives had gathered around us now, their curiosity palpable as they tried to reconcile my transformed appearance with their established understanding of my circumstances.
Thank you, I said simply, accepting a champagne glass from a passing server. Melissa, congratulations again. Brandon, it's wonderful to see you. Brandon shook my hand with the kind of firm grip he'd learned in business school, but his eyes kept darting to my jewelry, as if trying to calculate its value. Great to see you too, Rebecca. You look, wow, really elegant. Aunt Susan materialized at my elbow, her voice dropping to what she probably thought was a discreet whisper. Honey, that dress is gorgeous. Please tell me you didn't go into debt for this party. You know we've all told Melissa that appearances don't matter. The irony of being lectured about fiscal responsibility while standing in a room where my parents had spent $25,000 on a single evening was almost too much to bear, but I kept my expression neutral. I saved up for something special, I said, which was technically true if you considered inheriting $47 million a form of saving. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several servers carrying what appeared to be an enormous gift basket wrapped in cellophane and topped with an elaborate bow. One of the servers approached our group with a clipboard. Excuse me, are you Melissa Walsh? That's me, Melissa replied, her attention immediately drawn to the oversized delivery. This just arrived for you. The delivery company said it was time-sensitive for tonight's event. Inside the elaborate wrapping was my $4,000 gift, the complete set of professional kitchen appliances Melissa had registered for, along with several additional items I'd added that weren't on any registry. High-end copper cookware, imported German knives, and a wine preservation system that cost more than most people's monthly car payments. The family gathered around as Melissa unwrapped each item, their expressions growing more bewildered with every expensive piece she revealed. This wasn't the homemade or modestly priced gift they'd all expected from me. This was the kind of present usually given by wealthy relatives or close family friends with substantial means. Rebecca, Mom said slowly, is this from you? It is. I hope you like everything, Melissa. Melissa held up the wine preservation system, which still had its price tag attached. I watched her eyes widen as she read the numbers, then quickly tucked the tag out of sight, but not before several other family members had seen it. This is incredibly generous, Melissa said, her voice carrying a new note of uncertainty. Are you sure you can afford... She caught herself before finishing the sentence, but the damage was done. She had about to ask, in front of 50 family members, whether I could afford my own gift. The assumption that I was financially irresponsible enough to buy presents beyond my means was so ingrained that she'd almost voiced it publicly. I'm sure, I said simply. The moment stretched uncomfortably as family members processed what they were seeing. Their understanding of my financial situation was being challenged by evidence they couldn't easily dismiss. The dress could potentially be borrowed or rented, but the gift represented a level of disposable income that contradicted everything they believed about my circumstances. Brandon's father, Michael Walsh,
approached our group with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested he'd been watching our interaction from across the room. He was a successful commercial real estate developer who prided himself on being able to assess people's financial status within minutes of meeting them. He had heard him use similar tactics with other guests throughout the evening, efficiently categorizing people based on their perceived net worth and social value. Rebecca, I don't think we've been properly introduced. Michael Walsh, Brandon's father. His handshake was firm, businesslike. That's quite an impressive gift you've given the happy couple. You must be doing very well in your graphic design work. It was a fishing expedition disguised as small talk, the kind of conversation opener wealthy people use to determine whether someone belongs in their social circle. I had heard him use similar tactics with other guests throughout the evening, efficiently categorizing people based on their perceived net worth and social value. I've been fortunate, I replied, deliberately vague. What kind of clients do you work with? Corporate accounts? Marketing firms? I could feel my family's attention focused on this exchange. Their curiosity about my transformed appearance was now combined with questions about how I could afford such an expensive gift. They wanted explanations that would fit their existing understanding of my life. A lottery win or secret marriage would be acceptable explanations because they would represent luck rather than merit. I've just been working hard, I said, cutting into my salmon with the kind of precise movements I had observed wealthy women use at business dinners. The evening continued with increasingly awkward interactions as family members struggled to reconcile my appearance and behavior with their established assumptions. During dinner, I found myself seated at a table with several cousins who spent the entire meal asking increasingly direct questions about my finances, my work, and my sudden ability to afford luxury items. Come on, Rebecca, my cousin Jennifer said over the main course. You have to tell us what's going on. Did you win the lottery? Get a huge promotion? Marry a millionaire we don't know about? Her tone was playful, but the questions were serious. The family needed an explanation that would allow them to maintain their understanding of my place in the hierarchy. A lottery win or secret marriage would be acceptable explanations because they would represent luck rather than merit. Just been working hard, I said, cutting into my salmon with the kind of precise movements I had observed wealthy women use at business dinners.
But my cousin David, who worked in finance, wasn't satisfied with vague answers. Rebecca, I've been doing some quick math in my head. That gift you gave Melissa, combined with your outfit tonight, represents serious money. I'm talking about what most people make in months, not what someone spends on a special occasion. The table had gone quiet. All conversation focused on our exchange. Sarah, my photographer, moved discreetly around the room's perimeter, capturing every expression and reaction as my family grappled with information that challenged their fundamental assumptions about me. Maybe we shouldn't be discussing Rebecca's finances at the dinner table, Melissa interjected, but her tone suggested she was as curious as everyone else about where I'd suddenly acquired the means to afford luxury items. You're right, I agreed. This is your special evening, Melissa. We should be celebrating your engagement, not talking about money. But the damage was done. The questions had been raised publicly, and my deflection only increased their suspicions that something significant had changed in my circumstances. I could see family members exchanging glances, their conversations continuing in whispers that weren't quite quiet enough to be private. The crisis point was building exactly as I had planned. My family was being forced to confront the possibility that their understanding of my worth, both financial and personal, might be fundamentally flawed. The comfortable dynamic where they could dismiss my achievements and patronize my choices was starting to crack under the weight of evidence that contradicted their assumptions. I excused myself from the table, ostensibly to use the restroom, but actually to check in with Sarah about what she'd captured so far. The evening was proceeding perfectly, with each interaction revealing more about how thoroughly my family had categorized and dismissed me.
The real revelation was still to come, but the foundation was being laid with every confused glance, every whispered conversation, and every failed attempt to explain away what they were seeing. They were becoming to understand that they might not know me as well as they thought they did, and that realization was about to become much more uncomfortable. The moment I had been planning for 3 months arrived during the toasts. Brandon's father had just finished a speech about family traditions and the importance of choosing partners wisely when Melissa stood up with her champagne glass raised, preparing to thank everyone for their generous gifts and attendance. Before we finish tonight, I want to acknowledge how grateful Brandon and I are for all the love and support you've shown us. The gifts have been incredibly generous, and we feel so blessed to have such wonderful family and friends. She paused, her gaze moving around the room before landing on me. I especially want to thank my sister Rebecca for her amazing gift tonight. I know how hard you work, and I want you to know that we appreciate the sacrifice you made to give us something so special. The word sacrifice hung in the air like a challenge. She was still operating under the assumption that my expensive gift represented a financial hardship, something I'd stretch beyond my means to provide. Her gratitude was genuine, but it was based on the belief that I had given beyond my capacity, rather than within my abundant means. I stood up slowly, my designer dress rustling softly in the sudden quiet. This was the moment. 3 months of planning, weeks of strategic preparation, and 32 years of accumulated evidence had led to this single point in time. Thank you, Melissa. But I need to clarify something. My voice was steady, carrying clearly to every corner of the room. The gift wasn't a sacrifice. Actually, it barely registers as an expense for me. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. Family members exchanged glances, trying to interpret what I meant. Dad's furrowed as he tried to make sense of my statement. What Rebecca means, Mom interjected quickly, is that love makes any gift feel worthwhile, regardless of the cost. No, Mom, that's not what I mean. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a manila envelope I had been carrying all evening. What I mean is that $4,000 is less than what I earn in investment interest every single day. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the jazz quartet seemed to sense the shift in the room's energy and let their current song fade to nothing. I could see Sarah positioning herself for better camera angles, capturing the frozen expressions on every face. 3 months ago, I inherited $47 million from our great-aunt Helena Richardson. She had been watching our family for years, and she left everything to me because she saw how I'd been treated compared to Melissa. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Several champagne glasses clinked as hands suddenly became unsteady. Melissa's face went completely white, while Brandon was looking like he was trying to solve a complex mathematical equation in his head. Dad stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. That's impossible! We've never heard of any Helena Richardson. She was Mom's aunt, Dad's sister. She made her fortune in technology investments in the 80s and lived quietly on a ranch in Montana. She knew about every family gathering I was excluded from, every achievement of mine that went uncelebrated, every time you chose Melissa over me. I pulled out Helena's letter and began reading selected passages aloud. I've watched your family for 30 years, and I've seen how they've consistently chosen your sister over you. I've seen your strength, your independence, your quiet determination to succeed despite their neglect. Mom's hand flew to her throat. Rebecca, this is your sister's engagement party. This isn't the time for... For what, Mom? For truth? I looked around the room, making eye contact with relatives who had spent the evening patronizing me about my finances. For 32 years, you've all treated me like the unsuccessful daughter, the one who needed advice and guidance and financial help. Tonight, you've been lecturing me about fiscal responsibility when I'm worth more than everyone in this room combined. Michael Walsh, Brandon's father, stepped forward. His business instincts had clearly kicked in, and he was studying me with new eyes. Do you have documentation to support these claims? I handed him the investment summary that showed my current net worth. His expression changed dramatically as he scanned the numbers, his businessman's mind immediately recognizing the legitimacy of the documents.
"These are real," he said quietly, more to himself than to the room. "The account numbers, the investment firms. This is legitimate wealth." The revelation hit the family in waves. First came the shock of the numbers themselves. Then came the realization of what this meant about their treatment of me. Finally came the understanding that every assumption they'd made about my worth, financial and otherwise, had been catastrophically wrong. Aunt Susan, who had lectured me about debt and responsible spending just hours earlier, looked like she might faint. 47 million? Rebecca, why didn't you tell us? Because I wanted to see how you'd treat me when you thought I had nothing. Tonight confirmed everything Helena observed about this family. Even when I arrived looking successful, when I gave an expensive gift, when I demonstrated that your assumptions about me might be wrong, you still patronized me. You still assumed I was being irresponsible with money I couldn't afford to spend. Jennifer, my cousin, who had joked about lottery wins and secret marriages, was staring at me with her mouth slightly open. But you live in that tiny apartment in Chicago. You drive an old car. You work as a freelance designer. I live in a studio apartment because I choose to. I drive a reliable car because I don't need to prove anything to anyone. And I work as a freelance designer because I love what I do, not because I need the income. The difference is that now everything is a choice, not a necessity. Melissa finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Why now? Why tell us this way? I looked at my sister, this woman who had been the golden child our entire lives, who had received every advantage and opportunity while I was dismissed and overlooked. For the first time in our relationship, I held all the power and she knew it. Because this is who you all are when you think someone can't fight back. Helena wanted me to have the resources to show you exactly what you've been doing all these years. She wanted you to see the daughter you threw away. The room had divided into clusters of whispered conversations as family members tried to process this information. I could hear fragments. 47 million. Inheritance. Why didn't she tell us? How long has she known? But the most telling reaction came from my parents. Dad sat heavily in his chair, his face gray as he stared at the documents Michael Walsh was now passing around the immediate family. Mom looked between Melissa and me as if seeing us both clearly for the first time. "Rebecca," Dad said slowly, "we never meant, we didn't realize." "Didn't realize what, Dad? That I had value? That I deserved the same investment and support you gave, Melissa? Or just that I might someday have the resources to call you out on 32 years of favoritism?" Brandon, who had been silent throughout the entire exchange, finally spoke up. "So when you asked about my business plans at dinner last month, when you offered advice about commercial real estate investments, I was testing whether you'd listen to my ideas when you thought they came from someone without money. You dismissed every suggestion I made because you assumed I didn't understand high-level finance. But I've been managing a portfolio worth more than your father's entire company for months." The power dynamic in the room had completely shifted. Family members who had spent the evening offering me condescending financial advice were now looking at me with new expressions: respect, curiosity, and in some cases, obvious calculation about how they might benefit from my wealth. But the most dramatic change was in how they looked at Melissa. For 32 years, she had been the family success story, the daughter who had made all the right choices and deserved their continued support. Now she was standing next to someone whose net worth dwarfed everything she had ever achieved, and the comparison was impossible to ignore. "I don't understand why you kept this secret," Melissa said, her voice carrying a note of hurt that surprised me. "We're family. The family shares good news." "Families share good news with people they respect and value.
You've all made it clear for decades that you don't respect or value me. Why would I share the most important thing that's ever happened to me with people who consistently dismiss my worth? The truth was settling over the room like a heavy blanket. Every interaction they'd had with me, every assumption they'd made, every piece of advice they'd offered was being recontextualized through this new information. They were realizing that the daughter they'd written off as unsuccessful was actually the most successful person any of them had ever known. But more than that, they were beginning to understand that their treatment of me hadn't been based on my actual circumstances or potential. It had been based on prejudices and preferences that had nothing to do with reality. The turning point wasn't just about the money. It was about the complete reversal of everything they thought they knew about their family hierarchy, their own judgment, and the consequences of choosing favorites. And they were finally beginning to see me clearly for the first time in my life. The immediate aftermath of my revelation played out in real time across the ballroom like a social experiment in human nature. I watched 32 years of family dynamics crumble and reorganize within minutes as relatives who had dismissed me all evening suddenly discovered urgent reasons to approach my table. Cousin David, the finance professional who had aggressively questioned my spending earlier, appeared at my elbow with fresh champagne and a smile that hadn't existed during our dinner conversation. "Rebecca, I have to apologize for being so intrusive earlier. I was just concerned, as family." His tone had shifted from condescending to deferential, the change so dramatic it was almost comical. "I'd love to talk to you about investment strategies sometime. My firm handles wealth management for high net worth individuals." "I already have excellent financial advisors, thank you. They've been managing Helena's portfolio for over a decade." The rejection stung visibly, but he pressed on. Of course, but if you ever want a second opinion, or if you're looking to diversify your advisory team." I turned away before he could finish, effectively ending the conversation. David stood there for a moment, realizing he'd been dismissed by someone he'd been lecturing about money management just hours earlier.
Aunt Susan's approach was more emotional, but equally transparent. She appeared with tears in her eyes and her hand pressed to her chest in a gesture of dramatic remorse. "Rebecca, honey, I feel terrible about what I said earlier, about going into debt for tonight. I was just worried about you, the way family worries. We've all been so concerned about your financial stability over the years." "Concerned enough to offer help?" I asked quietly. "In 32 years, has anyone in this family ever actually offered me financial assistance? Or just advice about how I should manage money I supposedly didn't have?" The question hung between us as Aunt Susan's face went through several expressions. She was realizing that their concern had only ever manifested as judgment and condescension, never as actual support. "Well, we always thought you preferred being independent. You never asked for help." "Neither did Melissa, but she received help anyway, constantly. The difference wasn't whether we asked. The difference was whether you thought we deserved it." Meanwhile, across the room, I could see other dynamics shifting. Several family members had surrounded my parents, their conversations intense and occasionally heated. I caught fragments. "How could you not know? $47 million? She's been living like a student while she's worth more than—" Mom broke away from one of these conversations and approached me with the kind of careful steps someone might use approaching a wild animal. Her face was blotchy from crying, and her hands shook slightly as she reached for my arm. "Rebecca, we need to talk. Privately. There are things you don't understand about how we've tried to help you over the years." "Such as?" "We've always been available if you needed us. We just didn't want to interfere with your independence. You seemed so determined to make it on your own." I pulled up the recording app on my phone and set it on the table between us. "Mom,
I'm going to record this conversation. I want you to think carefully about what you're saying, because I've been recording family interactions for months." Her eyes widened at the sight of the phone. "You've been recording us?" Helena left detailed instructions about documenting family behavior. She wanted evidence of the patterns she'd observed. "So yes, I have recordings of every conversation where you've dismissed my achievements, given unsolicited financial advice, or assumed I couldn't afford basic expenses." The implications hit her immediately. She wasn't just being confronted with new information about my wealth. She was being told that her treatment of me had been documented and could be replayed as evidence. "What do you want from us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It was a question I'd been anticipating, but hearing it still sent a chill through me. She was asking what I wanted, as if this were a negotiation, as if my revelation had been a strategic move designed to extract something from them. "I want you to understand who you chose to overlook. I want you to see what 32 years of favoritism actually cost this family. And I want you to think about whether you're apologizing because you understand you were wrong or because you just found out I have money." Before she could answer, Melissa appeared beside us. Her engagement party had essentially ended the moment I made my announcement, with guests clustering around tables discussing my revelation instead of celebrating her upcoming marriage. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice strained. "Just the three of us?" We moved to a small private dining room adjacent to the main ballroom. Through the windows, I could see guests still mingling, but the energy had completely changed. This was no longer Melissa's celebration. It had become Rebecca's coming out party as a woman of substantial means. Once we were alone, Melissa's composure finally cracked. "Do you have any idea what you've just done? This was supposed to be my night, my engagement party, and you've turned it into this circus about money and family drama." "You're right," I said simply. "I chose your engagement party specifically for this revelation. Do you want to know why? Because this is exactly how I felt at every family gathering for 3 decades. Watching you be celebrated while I was ignored. Listening to everyone praise my achievements while mine were dismissed. Tonight, you get to experience what it feels like to be overshadowed by your sister." Mom sank into one of the chairs, her head in her hands. "Rebecca, we never meant to make you feel that way." "Intent doesn't matter, Mom. Impact does." Helena documented specific examples of how I was treated, compared to Melissa. Birthday parties where you spent 10 times more on her celebration than mine. College, where she got full financial support while I got student loans. Career advice, where her choices were supported while mine were questioned. I pulled out my phone and played one of the recordings from our family dinner 2 months earlier. Their own voices filled the room, discussing Melissa's career advancement with pride and excitement, followed by dismissive comments about my little art projects when I mentioned landing a major corporate client. Hearing their own words played back to them created a physical reaction. Mom winced as if she'd been slapped. Melissa's face went pale as she listened to herself casually dismissing my professional achievements. "We didn't realize," Mom started. "You didn't want to realize. It was easier to have one successful daughter and one struggling daughter because it simplified your narrative. Melissa was the investment that paid off. I was the child who required management and concern." The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Michael Walsh entered without waiting for permission, his businessman's demeanor now completely focused on me, rather than his future daughter-in-law.
Rebecca, I apologize for intruding, but I wanted to discuss something with you privately. He glanced at Mom and Melissa. Perhaps we could speak alone? Anything you have to say to me can be said in front of my family, I replied, enjoying the way the power dynamic had shifted. Brandon's father, who had barely acknowledged my existence earlier in the evening, was now seeking private audiences with me. Very well.
I've been thinking about your portfolio diversity, and I have some commercial real estate opportunities that might interest someone with your level of capital. Premium investments, the kind usually reserved for institutional investors. I almost laughed. This was the same man whose son had dismissed my investment suggestions during dinner because they assumed I didn't understand high-level finance. Mr. Walsh, 3 months ago, I offered Brandon advice about commercial real estate investments in emerging markets. He told me I didn't understand the complexity of large-scale property development. Now you're here offering me investment opportunities. What changed? The question hung in the air as Michael Walsh realized his mistake. He was treating me differently not because my knowledge had changed, but because my bank balance had been revealed. Brandon may have misunderstood your level of expertise. Brandon understood perfectly. He just assumed my expertise wasn't worth considering because he thought I didn't have money to back up my ideas. The natural consequences were unfolding exactly as I had hoped. Every family member who had dismissed me was now being forced to confront their own behavior, not through my accusations, but through their own recorded words and changed behavior. But the most profound change was in how they related to each other. The family hierarchy that had placed Melissa at the center of attention and support was being completely reorganized around the reality of my financial status. I watched Melissa struggle with her new position in the family dynamic. For 32 years, she had been the success story, the daughter who made the right choices and deserved continued investment. Now, she was standing in the shadow of someone whose net worth made her achievements look modest by comparison. "I don't understand why you hate me so much," she said quietly, tears starting to form in her eyes. "I don't hate you, Melissa. I hate how this family taught us that love and support were finite resources that could only go to one of us. You got chosen and I got managed, but that wasn't your fault. It was theirs." I looked at Mom, whose makeup had smeared from crying. "The real tragedy isn't that you favored Melissa. It's that you threw away a daughter who could have brought this family wealth, connections, and success beyond anything you imagined. Helena saw my potential when my own parents couldn't." The justice wasn't in their discomfort or embarrassment. The justice was in the truth finally being visible to everyone, including themselves. They were seeing clearly, for the first time, the consequences of their choices and the daughter they had systematically undervalued. And that clarity was going to change everything going forward. 8 months had passed since I shattered my family's perception of me at Melissa's engagement party, and I was sitting in the boardroom of Chan & Associates reviewing quarterly reports for the foundation I'd established with Helena's inheritance. The numbers on the spreadsheets told a story that would have seemed impossible a year ago. We had already distributed over $2 million in grants, supported 43 women in launching their own businesses, and funded scholarship programs at 12 universities across the country. But those numbers only represented the beginning of what Helena's gift had made possible. David Chun closed the portfolio review folder and leaned back in his chair, a satisfied smile crossing his face. "Rebecca, your great-aunt would be amazed by what you've accomplished. The foundation's growth rate exceeds what we projected, and your personal investments have outperformed the market by significant margins." I nodded, but my attention was focused on the wall behind his desk, where he'd hung a framed photograph from the foundation's first annual gala. 50 women who had been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed by their families, now running successful businesses, completing advanced degrees, or leading innovative projects. Each face represented a story that echoed my own in different ways. "The real measure isn't the financial returns," I said, picking up the latest batch of grant applications. "It's what happens when women finally get the resources and support they deserved all along." The foundation had become far more than a charitable organization. It had evolved into a movement that was documenting and challenging patterns of family favoritism that extended across cultural, economic, and geographic boundaries. Our research team had identified common factors that led families to consistently underinvest in children who didn't match their preconceived notions of success, creating self-fulfilling prophecies that limit potential for generations. Dr. Ilana Rodriguez, our head of research, had presented findings at 3 major psychology conferences, demonstrating how family favoritism created measurable impacts on everything from career trajectory to mental health outcomes. Her work was being cited by family therapists, business schools, and policy researchers who were beginning to understand favoritism as a systemic issue rather than isolated family dynamics. The data is undeniable, Elena had explained during our last staff meeting. Families consistently underinvest in children who don't match their preconceived notions of success, creating self-fulfilling prophecies that limit potential for generations. What you've created here is essentially a controlled experiment in what happens when we remove those artificial barriers. The Foundation's headquarters occupied an entire floor of a converted warehouse in Chicago's River North district. The space reflected both professional credibility and creative energy, with open work areas for our staff, private offices for confidential counseling sessions, and conference rooms designed for the workshops and networking events we hosted monthly.
Walking through those offices each morning had become a daily reminder of how dramatically my life had changed. Not just the obvious markers of wealth and success, but the fundamental shift in how I moved through the world. I no longer entered rooms wondering if I belonged there. I entered knowing that my presence brought value, resources, and perspectives that others needed. The personal relationships that had emerged from this new authenticity were unlike anything I'd experienced during my years of diminished self-worth. James Morrison, whom I'd met at a technology investors conference, was the kind of partner I never could have attracted when I was living small to accommodate my family's expectations. James was a successful software entrepreneur who had sold his previous company for 9 figures and was now focused on venture capital investments in women-led startups. Our connection was based on intellectual equality, shared values about using wealth responsibly, and mutual respect for each other's professional achievements. "You know what I find most attractive about you?" he'd said during one of our early conversations. "You're not trying to prove anything to anyone. You know exactly who you are and what you're worth, and you don't need external validation to confirm it." This confidence had taken months to develop fully. Even after the engagement party revelation, I'd caught myself falling into old patterns of minimizing my achievements or deferring to others' opinions. The transformation required conscious work with Dr. Sarah Kim, a therapist who specialized in helping people navigate sudden wealth and its psychological impacts. Imposter syndrome is common among inheritance recipients, Dr. Kim had explained during one of our sessions. You're essentially learning to integrate a new identity that contradicts decades of internalized messages about your worth. The work isn't just about managing money, it's about believing you deserve to have it. The therapeutic process had helped me understand that my family's treatment wasn't unique or even particularly malicious. They had simply fallen into patterns that millions of families repeat, making assumptions about children's potential based on limited criteria, then creating environments that reinforce those assumptions rather than challenging them. This understanding had been crucial for rebuilding relationships with family members who were genuinely committed to change. My parents had enrolled in family therapy, not because I demanded it, but because they wanted to understand how their behavior had affected both their daughters. The sessions were sometimes uncomfortable, but they were producing real insights about unconscious biases and communication patterns. We realized we were parenting from our own insecurities, Mom had shared during a recent dinner at my apartment. "I was so afraid of not giving Melissa every advantage that I forgot you deserved advantages too. I thought supporting her meant managing you when it should have meant supporting both of you equally." Dad's transformation had been more gradual but equally meaningful. He'd started asking about my work with genuine curiosity rather than polite obligation. And he'd begun incorporating my insights into his own investment decisions. The shift from dismissive to consultative had been jarring at first, but it reflected a fundamental change in how he saw my capabilities. "I've been reading about the Foundation's research," he'd told me recently. "The patterns you're documenting, the impact of family favoritism on career outcomes, I recognize our family in those studies, and I'm proud that you're turning our mistakes into solutions for other families." Melissa's journey had been the most complex to navigate.
Her wedding had proceeded as planned, but the dynamic between us had fundamentally shifted. We were no longer the automatically successful daughter being supported by the struggling sister. We were now two accomplished women with different strengths and different paths. The adjustment hadn't been easy for her. During our monthly coffee meetings, she'd gradually opened up about feeling displaced in the family hierarchy, unsure of her identity when it wasn't defined by being the favored child. I realize I never learned to validate my own achievements, she had admitted during one particularly honest conversation. Everything I accomplished was immediately celebrated by the family, so I never developed internal confidence. When you revealed your success, I suddenly felt like I didn't know how to measure my own worth without external approval. These conversations had led to Melissa becoming one of the foundation's volunteer advisors, using her marketing expertise to help other women develop professional skills and build confidence in their abilities. Working together had created a new dynamic between us, one based on collaboration rather than competition. It's strange, she had observed recently. For 30 years, I thought we were competing for limited family resources. Now I understand we were both being limited by the family's narrow definition of success. There was room for both of us to excel, they just couldn't see it. The foundation's impact had begun attracting attention from other philanthropists and social entrepreneurs. We'd been invited to present our model at the National Foundation Summit, and 3 major universities had requested partnerships to expand our research into family dynamics and career development. But the most gratifying recognition had come from unexpected sources. Helena's former colleagues from her technology investing days had reached out after learning about the foundation, sharing stories about her early insights into companies that others had dismissed as impossible or impractical. Helena always backed the entrepreneurs that other investors overlooked, explained Marcus Webb, who had worked with her on several major deals in the 90s. Women founders, immigrant entrepreneurs, people developing technologies that were too advanced for their time. She had this ability to see potential where others saw risk, and her track record was extraordinary because of it. This perspective had helped me understand that Helena's decision to leave me her fortune wasn't just about correcting family injustice, but about continuing an investment philosophy that had built her wealth in the first place. She'd spent decades proving that overlooked potential often generated superior returns, and she'd chosen me to continue that work on a personal and social level. The business opportunities that had emerged from my revealed wealth had been carefully evaluated and selectively pursued. I joined the boards of 3 technology companies, not because I needed the income, but because my insights about undervalued markets and overlooked talent were proving valuable in corporate contexts. One of these companies, led by Maria Gonzalez, had been seeking funding for a platform connecting skilled immigrant women with remote work opportunities. Traditional investors had dismissed the venture as too niche and difficult to scale, but I had recognized the enormous untapped potential in skilled women who were being overlooked by conventional hiring processes. Your investment didn't just provide capital, Maria had explained during our latest board meeting. It provided credibility. When other investors saw that someone with your track record believed in our vision, they started taking us seriously. We've now placed over 3,000 women in professional positions, and our client retention rate exceeds 90%. This pattern had repeated across multiple investments. My willingness to fund ventures led by women who had been systematically underestimated was generating both financial returns and social impact that exceeded conventional investment strategies. The personal growth that had accompanied these professional and philanthropic developments was perhaps the most profound change of all. I'd spent 32 years shape-shifting to accommodate other people's comfort levels, making myself smaller to avoid challenging their assumptions about my capabilities or worth.
Now I was living as my full, authentic self, and the difference was transformative. Business meetings where I'd previously deferred to others despite having superior insights became collaborative discussions where my contributions were expected and valued. Social situations where I'd minimized my achievements to avoid seeming boastful became opportunities to share experiences that might inspire or educate others. The dating landscape had completely transformed as well. Men who were interested only in my financial status were easy to identify and dismiss, but I had also attracted partners who appreciated the full scope of my character, the resilience that had enabled me to succeed without family support, the creativity that had built my professional reputation, and the wisdom that came from understanding what it meant to be undervalued and overlooked. James and I had developed a relationship based on intellectual partnership and shared values about using resources responsibly. Our conversations ranged from investment strategies to social impact theory, and our collaboration on several business ventures had demonstrated that we brought complementary strengths to both professional and personal endeavors. I've never been with someone who challenges me to think bigger about what's possible, he'd told me recently. Your perspective on overlooked potential has influenced how I evaluate investment opportunities, and your foundation's research has changed how I think about talent identification and development. The foundation's annual gala had become a major event in Chicago's philanthropic calendar, attracting leaders from business, academia, and social justice organizations. This year's theme, Investing in Invisible Potential, had drawn over 400 attendees and raised $3 million for expanded programming. But the most meaningful moment of the evening had been the keynote speech delivered by Dr. Amanda Foster, one of our first scholarship recipients. Amanda had used foundation support to complete her medical degree and was now conducting research on healthcare disparities in underserved communities. 5 years ago, my family told me I wasn't smart enough for medical school, Amanda had shared with the gala audience. They'd supported my brother through law school while suggesting I pursue nursing instead. The foundation didn't just provide financial support, it provided the external validation I needed to trust my own assessment of my capabilities. Listening to Amanda's speech, I thought about the ripple effects of Helena's decision to leave me her fortune. The money had provided immediate relief from financial constraints, but the real gift had been permission to live authentically and the resources to help others do the same. As the gala ended and guests began to leave, I found myself standing near the silent auction tables, looking at photographs from our various programs, women starting businesses, completing advanced degrees, developing innovative technologies, creating art that challenged conventional perspectives. Each image represented potential that had been systematically overlooked until someone provided the support and recognition it deserved. Dr. Rodriguez approached with a champagne glass in her hand and a thoughtful expression on her face. "I've been thinking about something all evening," she said. "Helena's letter mentioned that she'd been watching your family for years, documenting patterns of favoritism and their impact. Do you think she would have intervened if she'd been alive to see how those patterns were affecting you?" It was a question I'd wondered about many times. Helena had chosen to help from a distance, documenting injustice rather than directly challenging it. But her inheritance had come with specific instructions about using documentation to reveal truth, suggesting she understood that change required evidence rather than accusations. I think she knew that direct intervention would have been dismissed or rationalized away, but wealth that couldn't be argued with or minimized, that created a situation where my family had to confront the reality of their choices, rather than just my interpretation of them. The conversation reminded me of a letter I'd received recently from Jennifer Wu, one of our scholarship recipients who is now completing her residency in emergency medicine. Jennifer's family had consistently dismissed her academic achievements while celebrating her brother's mediocre performance in business school. The foundation's support taught me that external validation isn't about proving my worth to people who were determined not to see it. It's about finding people who recognize what I bring to the world and can provide the resources I need to maximize that contribution. This understanding had become central to how I approached all my relationships, both personal and professional. I was no longer interested in convincing anyone of my value. I was focused on connecting with people who already recognized it and could help me amplify my impact. Standing in my apartment later that evening, looking out at the Chicago skyline, I realized that Helena's greatest gift hadn't been the financial inheritance itself. It had been the demonstration that one person's belief in overlooked potential could create exponential change across generations. The foundation was now supporting women whose own daughters might never experience the kind of systematic favoritism that had shaped my early life. The businesses we'd funded were creating employment opportunities for other undervalued women. The research we commissioned was changing how therapists, educators, and policymakers understood the long-term impacts of family favoritism. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Martinez, whose engineering startup had just landed a major government contract. Rebecca, we're hiring 12 new engineers this quarter, and we're specifically recruiting women who were told they weren't naturally suited for technical careers. Your foundation model is becoming our hiring philosophy.
Messages like this arrived regularly now. Updates from women whose success was creating opportunities for others, forming a network of support that extended far beyond what any single foundation could provide directly. As I prepared for bed, I thought about the conversation I'd had with my parents the week before. They'd asked if I was happy with how everything had developed, if the dramatic revelation at Melissa's engagement party had been worth the disruption it created. "I'm not happy about the 32 years of being undervalued," I'd told them, "but I'm grateful that Helena gave me the tools to transform that experience into something that could help other women avoid the same limitations. The disruption wasn't just necessary, it was overdue." The truth was that I'd never been happier or more fulfilled, not because of the luxury apartment or the designer clothes or the investment portfolio, but because I was finally living as the person I'd always been, underneath my family's diminished expectations. I was successful, confident, generous, and completely unapologetic about taking up space in the world. I was using my resources to create change that would outlast my lifetime. I was surrounded by people who valued my contributions and challenged me to grow. Most importantly, I was proof that potential doesn't disappear when it's overlooked. It simply waits for someone to recognize and nurture it. Helena Richardson had seen that potential in me when my own family couldn't. Now I was using her gift to see and support potential in others, creating a legacy that would extend far beyond the financial inheritance that had made it possible. The cycle would continue, generation after generation, as overlooked women found the support they needed to become the successful, confident leaders they were always meant to be. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.